You all have an important role to play with regard to this effort. The transition to zero emissions in the goods movement industry is it's an imperative for us as a region, and we're not taking it lightly. And so we hope that having this really august group representing both private and public thinking around this issue would enhance the quality of the deliberation. And actually, I'm hoping that you all find it fun to be with each other, such that we would get a really good work out of this. Today's agenda will talk about study objectives. So we will get grounded on what we're trying to get done, what the approach will be, and what the schedule will be, and hopefully talk a little bit about the deliverables that we expect to see. My expectation is that you will all be able to, in a collaborative process and open discussion, maybe even amend some of those things that we may have assumed we'll talk about, and hopefully enlarge the discussion further. The TAC is really intended to advise us, and we're hoping to be able to take that into our regional planning process, and ultimately with the eye of, with intent of implementing this with some of you who are key stakeholders in what will become the implementation of the findings and the deliverables that the TAC comes up with across the region. So we're really taking, we're hoping that this group will be part of that critical success that we expect this effort to lead to. Now, I mentioned earlier on that, the work of developing a regional roadmap to support the zero emission infrastructure for medium and heavy duty vehicles in our goods movement industry in the region. That work is important to us, and what we had done, just for some background, at least within the SCAG policy framework, is our regional council had earlier on this year, in March, adopted a goods movement policy. And hopefully that comes up in the discussion as to the elements of that policy, which sort of give us some cover as to what we want to get done with regards to this effort, which is to make sure that we have equity in it. We have obviously sustainability, and also make sure that there is economic viability to how we approach this. That was in March. In April, we also had a policy framework that was established with a clean technology resolution that our regional council adopted, again, layering on this concept of where we want to go as a region in terms of sustainability. So I say all of that to say that your work is grounded in some really solid foundation on the policy framework with our policymakers, and this work is really important to us, and I'm hoping that you all have a great deliberation, and we'll be checking in from time to time. Thanks, Allison, for having me here. And again, thank you all for taking the time to join us, and looking forward to some of the outcomes of your conversations.
Thank you so much for joining us, Kome. And yes, I will continue with the meeting. We're happy if you stay, and we understand if you have other commitments. So Lars, can you go to the next slide, please? So I wanted to, again, echo Kome's words of welcome. We're very excited to have such a good crowd, to have these important deliberations about our regional zero emission infrastructure plan that we are developing. This is our first TAC meeting, so I'll be doing some introductions. I'll turn it over to some of the project team members to do a project overview, and also give you a little more details about your role as TAC members. And then the latter third to half of the meeting, we really want to hear from you in terms of some of your goals and and expectations for both the study as well as for what you'd like to see in zero emission trucking around the region. And then we'll go through some next steps. Before we dive in, I just wanted to do a little bit of logistical information. If you have a moment, it would be great to put your name in the chat by way of introducing yourselves. And we will have, again, like I said, time for more in-depth dialogue later in the meeting. We do want to encourage participation. So if you note, there's a reactions tab in the Zoom window, and you'll see a raised hand icon. You can raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Also, you can offer some thought into the chat. I do want to just mention something about the recording. So we described in the TAC charter that we're going to be recording the presentation portion of the meeting. So any dialogue that, happens in the first half of meeting, whether you have questions or want some additional elaboration, that will be recorded. In the second half of the meeting, when we have more in-depth Q&A, we'll turn off the recording to allow for, hopefully, everyone to feel more comfortable sharing. We welcome you, of course, to turn on your cameras, but if not, if your situation doesn't allow, we understand. Also, in terms of meeting materials, we had circulated the Technical Advisory Committee charter, as well as the agenda and a fact sheet about the project in advance. I believe one of our project team members will put the website link to our study webpage in the chat, where you will be able to find all those materials. We intentionally did not circulate the PowerPoint because we want to keep you on your toes, but we are definitely going to be making it available after the meeting, and it can also be found on the study webpage. Next slide, please. I want to quickly introduce the other members of the project team. This is a large study, and there's several firms involved. SCAG is the leader of the regional plan, but we've brought Cambridge Systematics, CRA, ICF, Red Hill Group, Tioga Group, and Berkeley Lab on as consultants to assist. Next slide, please. One other thing that I really want to mention is that this study is funded by a grant from the California Energy Commission. So I really want to acknowledge our funders from the CEC, as well as our collaborators from CalSTART and EPRI. As I said, this study is partially funded by a grant where we are sub-recipients on the larger statewide e-truck study, which is short for the Electric Truck Research and Utilization Center. That larger study is aiming for the development, advancement, and deployment of innovative medium and heavy-duty high-powered charging infrastructure along key freight corridors that promote the adoption of Class 7 and 8 battery electric zero-emission trucks. Through our role as subrecipient, SCAG will be providing data analysis and outreach that feeds into that larger statewide effort. But our study is going to be representing the planning priorities and goals of our region. So as we develop our plan, that will feed into larger statewide efforts through this e-truck study. One key difference is the e-truck study is solely focused on battery electric trucks, but the SCAG-ZETI will take into account battery electric as well as hydrogen fuel cell studies. And I know that there are definitely members on this call who are participating heavily in both. I just want to assure you we're going to be having open communications throughout the process so that the efforts are as coordinated as possible. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anurag to give a study overview. And Anurag, you can advise how you'd be handling questions during your portion.
Sure. Thanks, Alison. Good morning, everybody. I'm Anurag Kavanduri from Cambridge Systematics. I am the consultant lead. I have with me a very strong and capable team, and also from SCAG, a lot of great support. I'm really excited to have all of you as part of ATTACK to support us as we move forward. I'll take a few minutes to describe the project. I think just from an ease, from just the flow of the meeting, just type in the questions. I have my colleagues Sam and Anna and Lars and their team, everybody monitoring questions. If there is something that I'm completely misrepresenting, they will call me out. Otherwise, we can start addressing them as once we get past the presentation portion of the discussion. Next slide, please. As Kome eloquently and then Alison also laid out, this is an important study. We know change is coming and change is actually happening, and a lot of the push towards zero emission vehicles is coming from Southern California because of the issues we have, because of the challenges we face, and because of the way California is a leader in advancing this technology. Our goal is to, through this project, is to create a regionally supported, which means all of you, roadmap for medium and heavy duty zero emission truck infrastructure. And we call this zero emission as opposed to just electric, because we are focusing both on battery electric and hydrogen. Alison mentioned that again in her early discussions about how this study ties into the bigger CEC effort. We want to understand and we want to address stakeholder concerns to the extent that we can, because there are many stakeholders in this region. We want to take and accept and diverse viewpoints as we help build this roadmap. And then we want to leave something that's actionable as opposed to just a roadmap. So we will get down as we go into the study to some site specific or to some broad rules about how things need to be done. Next slide, please. You can keep clicking through. It's a 3-phase study. Phase 1 is actually a lot of understanding existing conditions and conducting existing outreach, extensive outreach, because it's a very fast moving field. The literature review that my colleague Anna did 4 months ago is probably a bit dated because things are moving that rapidly, both in the public and the private sector. Some new messages and missives come from both the federal and the state government. So this is something that we keep track closely through the project. The outreach program is also pretty extensive, and I'll talk about it in just a second. And then we also want to build a strong technical framework. So it's grounded in reality, it's grounded in what is happening on our roadways. And then ultimately phase 3 is to actually help identify some locations for where public charging infrastructure may be viable locations, right? And then ultimately lead to developing of a plan. If you go to the next slide, this just breaks it down a little bit more. It's a 12, we started the project earlier in the year, but it took us a while to get organized, to get you on, so you understand how the project flows from this point onwards. We are at a stage now where we are doing some work on we have done work on the literature review. We're starting the surveys. We've started a lot of the technical work. So everything in the pink we've started doing. The green we're leading into, and then of course later in the year we'll start taking transportation demand and then applying it to the to charging requirements. So this study is pretty interesting, and we have colleagues who are really good in energy modeling and we're really good in transportation. And this is starting to be the nexus of these two industries. It's always been there, but it's getting even more tied at the hip. So I'm glad to see when I see this tag, it's a broad spectrum of people across very wide experiences. And we will need all your experience as we start planning and as we start coming up with potential solutions or potential options to get your feedback. So again, this is the broad structure of where the project is going. And I'll take a few seconds to actually dive deeper into each of the phases. So if you go to the next couple of slides, please. Phase 1 is the literature and outreach. We are neck deep, knee deep, but we'll need some help as well from all of you. Later on in the discussion, we'll ask some specific help. We are not doing just a single way to do outreach. The technical advisory committee is one of 4 approaches for us. Red Hill Group, Mark McCord, is actually just getting ready to do some surveys on the field with fleet operators to understand their needs and their vision of what's coming in the future. We'll also do a lot of focus groups and one-on-one interviews with private sector as well as the as public sector agencies. This is coming next in the next month and a half. So this is where we'll need some help from you. We have a good list of people that we want to chat with, but I'm sure all of you have Rolodexes far bigger than ours. So we'd like to take advantage of that. And our stakeholders are pretty diverse, as I just mentioned, right? It's state government. I'm glad to see Caltrans and CEC are participating here. We also have county level agencies. The ports are a big part, especially in our part of the country. And then the private sector. That's equally important because both connections need to work really well for our communities, we say, to reduce emissions, for businesses to thrive. So it's actually a pretty, I'm pretty excited for the stakeholder list, and I'm glad to see we have a lot of participants. So this is one part of the big effort. Next slide, please. And again, we all know what we are working towards. California has pushed a lot of laws and proposals forward. As I said, we are innovative, but we're also at the bleeding edge of what happens. So a lot of changes and a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainty, and early adopters are all happening here. And we have done some of the literature review. The literature review keeps getting redone. So it's from a consultant viewpoint, it's like, oh my God, when will we ever finish the literature review? But on the other hand, if I take one step back, it's a pretty exciting space to be in because things are changing rapidly. And then next slide, if we start thinking about the literature review, it's, as I mentioned, it's multifaceted. It's a statewide grants, great. There's national efforts, but also it's pretty specific to Southern California. We've also had some successful grant applications from some of our colleagues down here in Southern California, and we want to hear about what they are doing. Because the last thing we want our roadmap and blueprint is very different from the efforts that others are doing, or for their efforts to not build on ours. So that collaboration will be pretty critical. So that's phase one, which is interesting and exciting. Phase two is what I am pretty excited about as well, because it's a lot of technical work. And we're actually pushing the boundaries of some of the technical work in this space. It's actually building off existing work, but taking it to a slightly different level. So if you go to the next slide, please. There are two portions to the technical work, which is understanding the transportation demand for truck movements. And then there is the energy requirements based on these truck movements. And there's a lot of uncertainty between where we are today and a future year, because electrification or zero emission vehicles is probably an inevitability. But the rate of adoption and the rate of adoption by different market segments and the time at which it happens is still uncertain. So how do we capture these for interim years is actually an interesting problem to solve. On the left-hand side, that's something that Cambridge Systematics, myself, have done for many years, which is understand truck and even SCAG, right? We understand truck data really, really well. We understand truck movements, commercial vehicle movements really well. Even as we speak, SCAG is updating their freight, the heavy duty truck model. And that's a big portion of the way we are thinking about it. But we're also utilizing new anonymized truck GPS data to understand what the travel patterns are. And the one interesting piece is when we think of electrification, it is not just the length of the trip, but it's the total mileage that a truck traverses over the day. That's how we need to start thinking about the problem. And that's how we need to start addressing these issues of who may need public charging infrastructure, when may they run out of charge, and at which location may they run out of charge. So those are new pieces. And then just like you have in fuel, the heavier your vehicle, when you're carrying loads, the greater your discharge of electricity. So that needs to be captured as well. The good news about Southern California, well, this year was different, but the weather remains relatively the same. Depending on the weather, you could have some pretty big fluctuations as well. So as we start thinking about the statewide effort, which is also part of a similar analysis, that may play a bigger role. And then you have the work on the energy side, which I started talking a little bit about, but how do we take this transportation information to measure the energy demands? We have LBNL, Berkeley National Lab, who have built a tool called Heavy Load. They've actually done it with CC and CARB at statewide level. But we are integrating newer data and newer way to process the truck information to help strengthen and capture more refinement in their tools. If you go to the next slide. By the way, if it were up to me, we would speak about this for 2 hours, but that's just a technical analysis. So I'll try to go forward. There are 4 steps on the truck data processing. GPS data processing. We've got good data. We're actually processing the trucks and daily patterns, as I mentioned. Then we have to expand it so it better reflects reality. We just can't take a sample and say, hey, this is it. So validating and comparing it to the SCAG model, to the statewide travel demand model that CS has also developed to make sure that things look reasonable. That's an important part. And then the third part is, as I said, as I started hinting, market segmentation is important. And that's where some of the survey data starts feeding in as well. Who is likely to use public infrastructure? When are they likely to use public charging infrastructure? And what are their travel patterns today, right? Do they go and return back to the home base? Are they a long distance carrier? Are they short distance truck? So a lot of these features come into helping make the decision. And then ultimately, as I said, payloads are important as well. And so we're taking data from a lot of other federal data sources, the California Vehicle Inventory Use Survey, which CS and Red Hill and CalSTART, 3 members of the team and the advisory committee actually participated in many years ago. And Caltrans as well, right? So how do we build all of these pieces so there is consistency and we are pretty comfortable and confident about the data and the models that we are doing? Next slide, please. And then the final side of the energy is you have all of this great data. You have a base year, you have a middle year, you have a future year. But then when you start saying, what is the EV penetration in the interim years? And then what is the range of battery? Does that change? Does the technology keep improving? Just a few days ago, I heard there was a press release from Toyota which said, oh, we figured out a way to really make these batteries super small and increase their capacity a lot. It's still prototype, and I know it's a lot of this industry is a lot of not grounded in actual field testing fully. So some of it is excitement about the things, possibilities that are changing, but we need to capture some of these in our modeling so it's somewhat realistic. Because the last thing we want is either too much infrastructure built out or too little, because this infrastructure, especially for trucks, is not as simple as just sticking a small charging port at the corner of your street, right? These tend to be larger and they have more land requirements. And land, as we know, is at a premium in California. So how do we utilize this and how do we come up with a plan that is most reasonable? So this is phase 2, a lot of technical approach. And the feedback, the information that we get from the surveys feed into this data. So our data and models are also reflecting what's coming from the from people on the ground like you, many of you. And then phase 3, it starts thinking about, well, based on these models, based on the travel patterns, where are the sites and what kind of sites do we need to start thinking about? If you go to the next slide, please. In general, we imagine there'll be 2 types of charging. One is depot charging, right, which is private. You could just run it for your own fleet of vehicles. Or if you're a warehouse distributor, you may do it for just the trucks that serve your warehouse. You may have very different business models. And then we would also on-route charging, which may be more interesting, or which may be where we may have the primary focus, because this requires a lot of public and private agencies to come together to build successful plans. So both of these plans, we need to better understand. We need to understand what's happening in the space. My colleague, Sam Ponazeri from ICF has done a lot of work in this space. So he and his team will actually start contributing to this as we move forward. And then we just have some initial criteria about siting, if you go to the next slide, which is, are these going to be brand new places, or is it more logical that these will be built where there's already existing truck parking? Maybe there are utility challenges in certain sites, but in other places, maybe these are the most logical places to do. What is the land price? As I mentioned, it's at the premium. What other amenities do drivers need? What are long-term contracts that some trucking fleets may have with operators? And what does that mean for where they choose to charge on the road? And a lot of this is also safety is a big part, equity. We just don't want to go put it in communities, or we don't believe they should go into communities where you have more multimodal transportation. It may be inevitable, but how do we mitigate and manage these options are all part of this effort as we start thinking about it moving forward. Next slide. If this is an image, how we imagine when at large rest areas and large spots, how these would look like, right? You have charging stations on one side, you have repurposing some other parking areas for hydrogen, but how many sites and what locations, and what is the specificity that we can tackle within this project? We're not going to go down to saying, here is the intersection at which it needs to happen. but we'll try to get back to the point of, well, here is where we see a lot of travel demand in this area, and here are the kinds of sites that could be beneficial, and here is the kind of requirements that they may have. But this is not a complete real estate development plan. We're not there. We're just trying to provide guidance for SCAG and for the region as we all collectively start thinking about implementation in the future. Next, thank you. I think I covered this in the previous slide, but yeah, we want to have phasing because adoption will change over time. We want to pay attention on this effort both for battery and hydrogen technologies. And ultimately, we think all voices need to be heard, government, community, as well as industry, so we can find a common ground. And we are, by your active participation and by participation of other members like you, we're hoping that by the end of this project, there is consensus, there is general agreement on the broad way to think about this. None of us, I don't expect anyone to be 100% saying, yep, this is exactly the way. Maybe you are, and that's great. That means we've done a fantastic job. But can we have consensus as we start thinking about how we're going to move forward as a community by keeping policy goals in mind, by keeping our own communities thinking in mind as we move forward. And just, I think I covered this a little bit, but just again to reiterate, we've done a lot of the literature review. We're just heading out into the field for surveys. We've started doing a lot of the technical work with the GPS data processing. Ben and his team have been working with the state to refine and update their model, and they'll bring it here, and then we'll refine it some more for both this effort as well as the e-truck effort that both CS and Berkeley Lab are also part of. And the next time, as we start talking about, we'll start having some more results about what we have found in the field. But that's sort of the end of this part of the presentation. I see Lars has come on, probably to weigh in, but Lars, alternative.
Terrific, Anurag. Thank you so much. So we are actually at the moment where we've supplied a little time for everyone to take a brief break, maybe a moment to stretch, to refresh your beverage. Let's give everyone a couple of minutes, and perhaps we'll have another break a little bit later if we feel like this one was a little early. So let's give everyone 2 minutes, and then we'll hear from each of you. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Allison, I believe that you were hoping to give Anurag a chance to field some questions.
I mentioned in chat as well. I know we covered a lot. If there are questions, we're happy to take it. I try to balance overwhelming you with a lot of information, at the same time trying to cover, do a good description of what we did. Either I did a great job or I put you off to sleep. I don't know what I did.
Yeah, I thought that there would be a little more opportunity to pause and have questions, but I realized that there's a lot of information we just gave you to digest right now. So I do want to just offer the opportunity to ask anything that you might be wondering about, or we can continue with the meeting and we'll have a chance a little bit later. Well, I see our first volunteer is Ian. Hi, Ian. Haven't seen you in a while. Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
I know Anurag, this one's going to be a doozy, so get ready.
Oh, no. I just wanted some clarification. Appreciate everything you presented so far. Interested in seeing everything else coming along. This looks like a really helpful study. I'm kind of curious, the sites that I think you mentioned on an earlier slide, 10 to 12 sites, are you looking at really just kind of publicly accessible sites only as part of the scope of this study, or were you looking at, because you mentioned later on of depot charging as well? And related to that, I'm trying to see how this also ties into the AB 2127 report, which showed that at least that report thought that there'd be 157,000 chargers needed statewide for medium duty, heavy duty. And so it's scale and publicly accessible, private. There's a lot sort of worked in. I'm trying to just understand the scope of this study, how much of the total piece of the pie that this is looking at.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're trying to tackle primarily the public infrastructure. That's the primary assessment, because it's hard to determine and decipher what businesses may have for their internal plans. It's difficult and also evolving. When we did the California Vehicle Inventory Use Survey 5 years ago, we saw that about 80% of medium duty trucks said they had a home base, and they went back to their home base 4 to 5 days a week, or 5 or more days a week. So it's that size. Yes, the total number of chargers, but where they're located may look quite different. So the primary focus is on the public charging. But if we see that a lot of the questions or a lot of the analysis as we go forward says a lot of this is on the private sector, then we'll assess both with Allison as well as with CEC and EPRI and CalSTAR, who are sort of main, who are running the main contract, to figure out if we need to expand it a little bit. Ian. So my answer, if it sounded like a hedge, it is a hedge, because I just don't know what we'll see as we go through the survey and what we find from the outreach. But the primary focus now is on the public side.
Yeah. Okay. Michael Ganny.
Hello, this is Michael Ganny with Watt EV. We are a public charging infrastructure developer. So we have a couple sites that are opening this year, 4 actually, and then, 3 in SCAG's region, and then a number that are actually in the permitting phase, pre-development phase. So how can we share these projects with the study?
Yeah, I will definitely reach out to you. We actually had a poll, Michael, 10 slides down, saying, "Hey, share this information with us." But great, thanks for reaching out. We definitely want to hear from you, because you and others in the private sector space are also trying to innovate a lot in different business models. We want to understand these business models as well, right? Is it battery as a service? Is it truck as a service? Some of which have existed in different forms, but some of it may take a completely different shape. So we definitely want to hear about some of these business models. We want to hear about how that could influence not the site location necessarily, but how the energy consumption may vary over the course of the day, right? So I think there are a few different dimensions. So we definitely want to reach out. As you will see later on, we also want to do one-on-one interviews. You may be a member of the TAC, but we want to do some one-on-one interviews as well, and focus groups. So that could be another great place where we get some information for you. Thank you for soliciting and agreeing to participate more. We appreciate it.
Great.
Ryan, I see you came on camera. I didn't know if you had a question. Okay.
Yeah, no questions so far. Just decided to get on the camera.
That's great. Welcome. Anything else before we start getting into the next section? Okay. Lars, I'll turn back to you.
Great. Thank you, Anurag. Thank you, everyone, for contributions so far. So my name is Lars Christensen. I'm a transportation planner with CR Associates. I'm very happy to be with you today as we gather to deliberate and discuss zero-emission truck infrastructure in the SCAG region. We want to let you know that we've thought really carefully and inclusively about whom to invite to be part of this technical advisory committee. Our approach discerned 9 broad perspectives on our topic and yielded an initial list of 70 organizations who could represent those perspectives. While aiming for a TAC membership between 25 and 50 people, or sorry, 25 and 30 people, we sent invitations to nearly 50 organizations. And you have all graciously accepted the invitation to be at the table. And we appreciate and thank you for your time and for your contributions. I just want to mention a little bit about the TAC charter, the primary charge from SCAG, and TAC responsibilities. So the TAC charter should be in your possession. It was sent to you along with the fact sheet and the agenda for today's TAC. The Technical Advisory Committee aims to provide guidance on the development of a regional roadmap for supporting infrastructure for hydrogen and electric zero-emission medium and heavy-duty trucks in the SCAG region. This is the primary charge from SCAG to aid in the vision, technical approach, and strategic development of a regional roadmap. We believe that you can give us the most well-informed advice possible toward the implementation of infrastructure for zero-electric, medium-duty, and heavy-duty vehicles. As far as TAC responsibilities are concerned, I'll go to the next slide for that. So each TAC member is expected to speak on behalf of their representing agency or company, or on behalf of themselves as experienced professionals in your respective fields. TAC members are expected to attend 6 TAC meetings, all of them virtual and conducted using Zoom. All meetings are scheduled for 2 hours and may include portions where TAC members are interacting in smaller groups. And to allow for emerging interest in this TAC, we will be accepting a new membership after this TAC. And we just ask that people who join the TAC after this to review this video and to review the meeting, the documents that we've shared with you already. Allison, did you want to say something else about this?
About the video?
No, about people joining after this TAC.
Just that we will, I think we circulated in our charter that we'll be having, we wanted to like solidify the membership of the TAC after the second meeting, but we understand that, you know, people might kind of tap others to join. And so we're going to be pretty flexible. We want this to be as inclusive as possible. So, yeah, feel free to make recommendations as the process moves forward.
That's great. Thank you, Allison. All right, TAC members are expected to supply advice on the engagement of persons or organizations in your respective fields. We need your help finding people who you believe should be at the table. So please be giving that some thought, and there will be another opportunity in just a moment for you to share suggestions you may have. TAC members are expected to respond to the project team as we bring materials forward to you. TAC members are expected to review products like reports or analyses that come before the group. Of course, we're looking for an open dialogue, an inclusive dialogue guided by the principles of inclusion and equity. We're aiming for all perspectives to be articulated and that no one perspective will overshadow the others. And finally, we just ask that that TAC members do not share documents that are in a draft stage and that aren't quite ready for public viewing. All right, so who's at the table today? A review of the chat, we can see everyone has introduced themselves, and this slide shows the organizations that everyone here is representing. As you take a look at this slide, again, I'd like you to ponder, contemplate, who's missing from this slide, what organizations should be present. And if something comes to mind, place it in the chat or jot it down. Again, we'll give you another chance to give us feedback. But we're very happy that that you're all here, and this is just a terrific group so far. Okay, I'm seeing in the chat that Louis Lozano says that their org logo is not there. Should I be here? Yes, you should be here. I don't know why that is the case. That's clearly an oversight on our part, and we'll make sure that that is corrected in the next go around. But yes, please stay. And thank you for spotting that. I appreciate that very much. All right, Ian asks, is SCPPA here? Allison, is SCPPA here? I don't believe so, but perhaps that's a suggestion by Ian McMillan as an organization that should be here. Is that correct, Ian?
Yeah, I think it might be good to at least reach out to them, see if they're interested.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the suggestion.
Yes, excellent. All right, very good. So you've seen a version of this earlier in the presentation when we were talking about the phases of the project and the key milestones of the project. This is the same image, only this time we've included the TAC schedule, and you'll notice that the TAC meetings correspond to the key milestones of the project. And you've of course seen a version of this in the fact sheet that was sent to you earlier. Okay, you've heard a lot from us, and now it's time for us to hear from you. And we have a few ways in which we're doing this. We're going to begin with some polls. So the first ways in which we're asking you to respond is through taking these polls and typing some answers to these polls. And then a little bit later, we'll have a chance for more direct dialogue. So Eric, if you wouldn't mind, we are going to discontinue recording and start